Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored Never Boring. For those of you who are new to the channel, you may not know that I tried Dungeons & Dragons for the first time ever this year. Myself and a small group of friends have been playing through the Lost Mines of Phandelver starter set. I'm the Dungeon Master, and then I have a group of 3 people who are playing the heroes, obviously. And this is the first time that any of us have actually played a proper Dungeons & Dragons role-playing experience. And it's been quite a lot of fun. I have been running a video series on our experiences, sort of showing us getting used to the game, getting into the game, learning how the game works. Unfortunately, that video series hasn't been getting a lot of traction on the channel, and every episode takes a huge amount of my time. So I made the decision that we were going to film up until there's a point in the adventure where they're at a village which has been taken over by these ruffians called Red Brands. And before I go any further, I should point out that I'm talking about the Lost Mine of Phandelver starter set mission in some detail, so there are going to be spoilers in this video. So if you want to play through this campaign and you don't want to know what's coming up or whatever, I do recommend you don't watch through any more of this video. But yeah, I made the decision that we would play up until the point where they had cleared out the ruffians from the village, which involved going to Tresendar Manor, which is where the ruffians were holed up. And I did actually record that session, and in fact the footage that you can see playing here while I'm talking is actually the footage from that session. Unfortunately, a lot of the audio was garbled, a lot of it was unclear, and it just didn't work out. It wasn't good usable footage. So what I'm doing now, we've played on past Tresendar Manor and on into the campaign, and I thought I would just use this video to give an overview of where we are now and how we feel about the game, and some interesting things that have happened to us along the way. So first of all, in this video, you will notice that there are loads of tiles laid out face down on the map. I'm using a flip mat, one of the Pathfinder flip mats, and I have drawn all of Tresendar Manor in advance. And what I had done in previous sessions was I had blue tacked pieces of paper over areas of the map that I could just peel off as they explored those areas, because obviously I don't want them to see the whole map in advance. But that wasn't working out so well. But I do have several of the Dungeons & Dragons adventure system board games. So I actually took the tiles from Castle Ravenloft, flipped them upside down and positioned them over the map. And it actually worked out quite nicely that as they explored the map, I was able to take off some tiles and reveal just enough of what they would be able to see. And it happened to work out very, very well with this particular map. So if you're wondering why there are tiles all over the place, that's what I've done. And yeah, this session we were picking up in Tresendar Manor, and it was an interesting situation because it was the first time where I had an opportunity to go off script significantly, because in the last session we'd had, the hero players had become convinced that the farm boy Carp was the key to getting into Tresendar Manor. They had it in their heads that he was really, really important. He wasn't. He has, I think, one line of description in the adventure book, and he is supposed to tell them one thing, which is that there's a secret entrance into Tresendar Manor. That's his purpose. It's to stop the heroes walking up to the front door. It's to give them an opportunity to sneak in through the back. My heroes got that information, but then they were convinced that Carp knew more and was integral in some way. So they decided to drag him along on their mission with them. And they put him on guard duty at the secret entrance, whilst they went round to the front door of the manor. Which is one of those situations where your hero party does something you're really not expecting them to do, and you're not really sure why they're doing it. Because they had become so convinced that Carp was important, I had leaned into it. So this was partially my fault, it has to be said. And I think it was a learning experience for me as well. I don't think I would be so cruel. This was my inexperience as a dungeon master. I think the heroes will tend to make decisions that are incorrect enough without the dungeon master layering it on. This is something that I learned, I think, quite frequently. The heroes will decide that a certain NPC is really important when he's not really, and I shouldn't really have leaned into it as much as I did. But they left Carp on guard, let's say, whilst they went in through the front. They got involved in a fight almost immediately and became very badly wounded, and then decided that they were going to hole up in one of the store cupboards in Tresendar Manor and sleep for 8 hours. And that was how the last session finished, and I really wanted to make them think of this more as a real life experience than a game or a video game or something. I wanted them to feel that there were repercussions for their actions. It doesn't make sense that they could go into the bad guy's lair, go and get into a corner and go to sleep for 8 hours whilst leaving a small boy on guard duty by the exit. So I had a little bit of time to come up with some things that would happen between our sessions, and when we came back I had already set those things in motion, and my intention was to screw with them a little bit and make them realise that every decision they make, this is a real world, and it's a world that moves around them. Even when they're asleep, the world isn't. And that was kind of the thrust of the start of this session, was making them face those consequences. So they wanted to sleep for 8 hours. I wasn't going to let them do that. 8 hours would have allowed them all to rest up and heal up properly and get all their spells and things back. I allowed them to sleep for 4 hours, and that gave their wizard the time that he needed to meditate and recover. It did not give them the chance for the cleric or the fighter to recover. And then I basically introduced a situation where there were noises outside. Some of the Red Brand goons had come into the room, and I forced the wizard to deal with that situation and ask him whether he was going to wake up his colleagues or whatever else. And we ended up in the situation where the fighter and the wizard were awake, and the cleric, who was very, very badly wounded, they left asleep, and they really, really wanted to keep him asleep. And things just went haywire, really. They got into a fight that they didn't really need to get into. They could have convinced the people that had come in that they were actually working for the Red Brands. They had already acquired some red cloaks that they could have been wearing. But instead it resolved into a fight because they weren't able to adequately convince the Red Brands that arrived that they were on their side. The fight went badly. The wizard failed to kill the Red Brand that was there. The Red Brand decided to try and make a run for it, and they completely fluffed their attempts to take him down as he escaped. He managed to escape through a secret door, which revealed to the heroes where a secret door was, but it also let this Red Brand completely escape, and they chose not to follow him. And this was a point where I decided to throw them a bone, and I decided that Red Brand would never make it to where he would be able to raise an alarm. That was a decision that I made just because things were... I think the heroes by this point had enough issues that had happened that it was time to throw them a bone. So that Red Brand never got to raise the alarm. He was actually eaten by the Norfolk that was in the next room, that the heroes were not aware of at that time. So after this fight, they let the cleric rest up still, and then they continued on their way, and they decided to go through the main hallway of Tresendar Manor. And they noticed that the structure of the corridor that they were in seemed like it was set up to be trapped, and they were very cautious. And they actually revealed that there was a pit trap in that corridor. And this was another interesting moment where, after they discovered where the pit trap was, there was then a long debate between the heroes of, well, how are we going to get over it? Can we scooch around the edge? Is there enough of a ledge to cling to? Can we set up some kind of pulley system? Should we put a rope across? Can we fire an arrow and then shimmy across a rope and things like that? And I didn't really know whether I should kind of push them towards a particular answer or just let them go with it. Eventually, the fighter just went, well, can we just jump across it? And I said, well, yeah. and they all jumped across it, and it was fine. But it was one of those moments where something that was a relatively simple thing, the scope of Dungeons and Dragons, and the fact that you have all these options and it's a completely free storytelling experience, had created a situation where the players were thinking so far outside the box rather than just keeping it simple, which was interesting to see develop in the party, and to see them sort of coming to that conclusion that you can just jump over the hole. After the pit, they came into a chamber where there were some skeletons, and this was fun for me because the skeletons are set up in such a way that they won't attack anybody wearing a red cloak, and all of the heroes were wearing red cloaks to be in disguise. But every time they went into this chamber, and they ended up going to and fro through this chamber quite a lot, every time I did make them stop and then described the skeletons adjusting their position to stare at them, just making them increasingly nervous every time that they went into that room, making them aware that the skeletons were poised for something to happen. And it was quite interesting. Every time they went in, they were just a little bit more cautious than they were the time before. That was fun. And then they found a prison cell, and this is where I went completely off script, because there's supposed to be some villagers in there that you can rescue, and they'll give you a little side quest and things like that. But I also had that one of the female prisoners was clutching to her a small shivering child. And this was also... I have a background in writing horror, and I wanted to go a little bit dark just to make them aware of that things can happen that are bad if they don't make good decisions. So Carp, the young farm boy that they had left on guard duty for 8 hours at the secret entrance, I had made it so that the Red Brands had found him, and because he had been spying on them, they had cut out his eyes and his tongue and then thrown him in the dungeon. And this was, like I say, it was to show that there's serious repercussions. It was also to test the waters a little bit, as like, how dark can I go, because at some point I do plan on writing my own adventure, and this was a good litmus test to see if I was going too far and where those boundaries were, whether they were going to be okay with that level of bad things happening, because it was a horrible thing. It was kind of like the worst thing that I could think of to do. So that was part of it. And also, I kind of wanted to see what they were going to do, but this was another situation where I was a bit concerned that they would just sort of go, okay, that was a bad thing to do. We've learned, we won't do that again. But I kind of wanted it was such a vile thing to happen. I wanted it to have some kind of ramifications on the party. So I'm interested to know what other people think, actually. So feel free to leave comments on this. But I actually created a little table of different, almost like psychological effects of being confronted with this injured child. And I made everybody roll on the table to see what would happen, and it ended up with the wizard is so racked with guilt that every time they return to the village, that he goes and pays some money for the child's care and protection to the mother of the child. And the other heroes became so enraged that they were no longer allowed to try and con their way past Red Brands. They would fight any Red Brands they found, just out of pure rage at what had happened. But I didn't know whether I'd kind of forced their hand a little bit too much in making them play the game a certain way. One of the things about Dungeons and Dragons is it's an opportunity for people to play their heroes their way and to do things their way. And so I was in two minds as to had I forced a situation on them that I shouldn't have done. So I'm interested to know what people think about that. And yeah, there's no need to comment on the fact that maiming a small child is a vile thing to do. I am well aware of it. It was I think I went too far myself, but it was just one of those things that kind of, how can I make them aware? Like I say, this is our learning adventure. So this was one of those things where I wanted to, as much as anything, sort of teach the idea that if you make a decision and it's a bad decision, bad things can happen. Having rescued the prisoners and become slightly enraged at the situation with Carp, the heroes then went into the main cavern section of Tresendar Manor, which is actually the area that you will go into first if you use the secret entrance, which I kind of think is what you're supposed to do. They certainly... they kind of kicked down the door and went in all guns blazing, which didn't work out well for them. But once you're in the cavern, there's a creature called a Norfolk. Now, I've got some experience of D&D, but I'd never heard of a Norfolk. Although I'd never played the game before, I do have some knowledge of D&D, but a Norfolk was new to me. And I think it's kind of a weird creature to include in a starter adventure, because it's a very difficult creature to play. If you play it very aggressively, you can really hurt the heroes, because Norfolks have the ability just to melt the skin straight off of people and do massive amounts of damage. So you don't really want to sort of come out all guns blazing with it. But the other thing it does is it can reach into people's minds and reveal their dark secrets. And this creates a massive opportunity for role-playing, but it's a very intricate bit of role-playing, which seems very advanced for your first dive into Dungeons & Dragons, because I wasn't quite sure how to handle it. Because the Norfolk got inside the mind of the wizard, and I was very lucky that we had set up this situation with Carp the farm boy, because I was able to lean into that. But if it hadn't been for that, I wasn't really sure how I was going to approach it. He also reached into the mind of the fighter at one point, and how would other people handle this? The Norfolk is supposed to be able to dig up a dark secret. Is it the case that you would ask your players to give you a secret about their character that they have created but that nobody else knows? Because they might not have anything to give, and then they've got to come up with something on the fly. Or, in my case, with the fighter, I went for something quite minor. I basically said that he used to pull the legs off frogs in the pond in the village, because he's a character who believes in his, in being moral and upright and always, protecting the innocents and stuff like that. He wouldn't harm anything. So I sort of tried to niggle him a bit by saying, yeah, but when you were little, you used to do horrible things. So that's how I went with it. But are you supposed to give the Norfolk the chance to make the hero reveal something? And then do they reveal that to the group, or do they take you into a side room and say, okay, this is the secret? But then you're giving the adventurer the choice of what secret he's revealing, and I don't feel like the hero should have that choice over what information the Norfolk reveals. The Norfolk should be able to reach in and grab what it wants. So, but if you don't know what that is, the other option is you take something that's already known off of that character's sheet that you've already been told about the character, but then it's not a dark secret. So I really didn't know the best way to approach it. So, but like I said, I made up something minor for the fighter, but with the wizard, I really wanted to make him suffer for the Carp situation. So I kept bringing up the Carp thing to him, and I did the Norfolk in a whispering voice. I hid my face behind my book every time I spoke, so they couldn't see my mouth moving or anything, and I put on a whispering voice and basically kept saying things like, you left the boy to be maimed, it's all your fault, and things like that, just to try and get under his skin. And then they really didn't want to fight the Norfolk. They were scared of the Norfolk, and they tried to barter with the Norfolk. They tried to come up with a deal, and the deal that I put before them was that the Norfolk wanted to eat the farm boy, and if they could bring the maimed farm boy into the Norfolk would eat the farm boy and allow them through. And I didn't know whether they were going to do it or not, to be honest. In the end, the wizard was very much against that. He was very much opposed to that. He had accepted this roll on the dice that said that he was racked with guilt and was going to pay money to the mother of the child and things like that. He adopted that into his role play and therefore would not give up the child to the Norfolk. And then it eventually devolved into a fight, and they actually managed to kill the Norfolk. I think the cleric did like a necrotic touch on the Norfolk and did massive amounts of damage, and then they just pummeled it to death. It was quite a brutal fight. But again, yeah, an interesting situation. Something that I, as a brand new, never before DM'd, it was something I wasn't really quite sure how to deal with it. But I had made a little Norfolk miniature myself. I'd made my own Norfolk miniature, and I got a chance to use that, so that was nice. Afterwards, the heroes found a room with some bugbears in it, and they basically decided to leave that well enough alone. They said they'd been having a rough time of it in the manor, and they didn't want to deal with the bugbears, so they left them alone. And then they eventually made it into the final room where Glassstaff is supposed to be. Glassstaff is the leader of the Red Brands, and the big reveal, again, spoiler alerts, is that Glassstaff is actually he's Sildar's friend. Sildar and this other character was supposed to be going to the village to look after it, and Glassstaff had decided that he was going to take things a different route and become a villain and control the village and the surrounding area with his ruffians. And they went into Glassstaff's chamber, and the room was empty, and there was a secret door open. And after a little bit of nudging to make them aware of the fact that that door had only recently been open, and obviously someone had left in a hurry, which is why it was open, they realised they had to chase him, and they ran after him, and they hunted him all the way back through Tresendar Manor, and they found him by the entrance hall where they were leaving, where they came in by, and he was desperately searching for something in a water cistern, and it happened to be something that the wizard had found right at the start of their adventure in Tresendar Manor, which was an escape kit. It had a change of clothes and some other bits and bobs in there. The wizard had found it and removed it, so Glassstaff was desperately searching for it. So they were able to apprehend him, and then rather than fight him or kill him, they actually managed to charm him, subdue him in a non-combative method, and walk him straight out of Tresendar Manor and back to the village. And that was basically the end of our adventure in Tresendar Manor. They took him to Sildar. The book says that you can keep Glassstaff alive and maybe introduce him later on. But again, they had been making fun of Sildar quite a lot. Because Sildar had been captured by goblins right at the very start of the adventure, they'd seen him as being a bit feckless, and they were always like, oh, Sildar, he's a bit of a wimp. So Sildar's not supposed to be a feckless character. He's supposed to be someone who could protect the village. He's supposed to be someone from a knightly order. So the revelation that Glassstaff was actually his friend, he basically served as judge, jury, and executioner and killed Glassstaff on the spot, and then made the heroes take him out and dump him. So it was just kind of like don't mess with Sildar. He's not as feckless as you think he is. And that was the end of Glassstaff. The other reason I killed him off was just because we're not really planning on continuing our adventure with these characters beyond the starter set. We're going to start a new adventure with new characters, possibly a pre-gen adventure, or maybe something that I'm going to work on myself. We don't know yet. But these characters, all of my players really want to invent their own characters now. They've been playing with these starter set characters, but they want to do their own thing now. They've got all these cool ideas for characters they want to be, and they want to change up how they're playing the game, which is it's nice that they're that enthusiastic about it. It's really cool. The only thing they left a loose end with Tresendar Manor was the bugbears. So what I basically did with those is they went and rested at the inn, and when they woke up the next morning, I basically had the bugbears stride into the village ready to cause some trouble. And the heroes went out to face them, and actually through a series of different spells and things, they convinced the bugbears that they were actually the wizard was actually Glassstaff, helped by the fact that the wizard had actually taken Glassstaff's glass staff, and they managed to convince the bugbears that they should just leave the village and go off. And that is what they did. The bugbears left. My plan was immediately to bring those bugbears back. My initial thought was that when the heroes went off to do another adventure, the bugbears would come back and ransack the village, which I thought would be funny. But I stopped myself from doing it because I thought about it and I thought, well, that's punishing the heroes for coming up with a clever way of resolving a conflict without resorting to just stabbing the monsters up. They used their wits, they used their spells, they used their knowledge of the spells they had to make the bugbears leave without causing trouble. And it seemed wrong to me to then go back and say, haha, yeah, well, you let them live, so they've come back and ransacked the place. So what I did instead was I kept them in reserve to use at a point where I thought that they would be helpful. And this actually came into effect later on when the heroes found an orc lair out in the woods that they needed to clear out in order to help a necromancer. And they fluffed killing the security guard. There was a lone orc on guard, and they fluffed the rolls completely. And the orc was going to rush inside and alert his mob to their presence. And at that point, I suddenly had the bugbears just turn up and kill the orc. And it was because they basically had nothing to do. So they didn't have the Red Brand team to guide their actions anymore. They didn't have Glassstaff. They didn't know what to do. So they'd wandered off into the wilderness and they were just moping around killing orcs and just causing a bit of a ruck. So, and then the heroes were actually able to team up with those bugbears temporarily in order to clear out the orcs. And then to reward the bugbears for their service, the heroes then brutally murdered them. And that was that. That was the end of the bugbears. So that's basically, I think, some of the major points that we've had up to this point. After you deal with Tresendar Manor, the starter set mission gives you the opportunity to go on lots of little mini quests and do things. So they've gone off and they've spoken to a banshee and they've helped a necromancer, and they've now gone to Thunder Tree, which is being run by a green dragon, and they have been exploring Thunder Tree, exploring the ruins, and they came across a group of dragon cultists, which they decided to make fun of. So again, I've gone slightly off script with those guys, but that's where we are at the moment. The heroes are currently being held at knife point by the dragon cultists, and my heroes are waiting for our next gaming session to find out what is going to happen. It's a real cliffhanger, and it's been a lot of fun. But there we go. That's where we are, I guess. We are having a huge amount of fun. I think I can speak for everybody and say we're all enjoying it more than we thought we would. It wasn't actually my idea to start Dungeons & Dragons. The other guys came to me and said, let's give it a go. And I was happy to do it. And I have certainly had a lot more fun with it than I ever expected to. We kind of try and plan our next session as soon as we finish a session. It's like, so when are we going to meet up again next? We're eager to keep the story going. And like I say, the guys are eager to create their own characters and go on new adventures and explore new spells and new abilities and new classes. And I would say Lost Mine of Phandelver is a fantastic starter set. I have said this before, and I will say it again. It's definitely a really good entry point to the game. It's too good in some ways. Some of my players have actually been saying there's too much content in this starter set, because they're actually getting to the point now where they know the game well enough that they kind of wish they could start over and have their own characters and things like that, but there's still loads of the mission left. After Thunder Tree, they've still got Cragmore Castle to go to, which is where the goblins are hiding, and then there's Wave Echo Cave itself, which is the final layer where the MacGuffin is, so to speak. So there's still so much game in this starter set. It's fantastic value, and it really is a good introduction. Like I say, there are certain points, like the introduction of the Norfolk. Perhaps that was a creature that they shouldn't have introduced in a starter set. But I highly recommend Phandelver. Our plans from here, we're not recording any of our sessions at the moment, so you won't see our adventures in Thunder Tree. Hopefully they will slay the dragon. But I will probably, if you would like me to, do some more videos like this, keep you posted on what we're doing. Once we've dealt with Phandelver, I think we want to try a one-shot, just a one evening adventure with where I will get to play as a hero rather than as the DM, and then from there possibly a new campaign, brand new characters, possibly an adventure that I'm coming up with. So there's our road through Dungeons and Dragons is by no means over, but like I say, for the channel, the low number of views that these particular videos get and the huge amount of time it takes for me to edit one of these videos means that it's just not viable for me to keep them on the channel. I can do several videos in the time it takes me to put together one of these Dungeons and Dragons ones. So I have to be realistic. I would love to keep doing them though. But like I say, I will keep you posted if you would like me to. But that's it from me for now. Please leave your comments below. I read them all and I'll do my best to respond if I can. If you have liked this video, then do please consider pressing the like button. And if you really like this video, please do consider subscribing if you do not already do so. And hopefully I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone, and happy adventuring.